I've always been one who has been cursed with more ideas than I have time. And I've always kind of scratched my head at those who are like, well, I don't know what to do. Like, well, come over to my house and I'll put you to work. Like, I don't have a lack of things to do. I have a lack of ability to get them done.
Welcome back to another episode of Meet the Ministers. I'm your host, Kevin McDonald, joined always by Alec Robinson. How are you?
I'm doing great. Just had some good lunch and ready to go and have another great interview.
Yeah, we're in Loveland, Colorado, and it is a beautiful day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Are you injured at all? I haven't asked you for a while.
No, I'm doing all right. I had a medical procedure, but I'm recovering, and everything's going good.
So the couch hasn't hurt you?
No, the couch is my friend.
We are very excited to introduce Micheal Tice. Micheal was baptized July 6, 2003 in Garden City, Kansas. Mr. Tice entered into ministry in 2014. Micheal has been at the Loveland Church of Christ for 5 years. He went to school at Sunset School of Preaching. Micheal did mission work in New York and Africa. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's just hop right in. How were you brought up?
So I grew up in the church. My grandmother grew up Methodist and met my grandfather. And I believe he's the one that converted her. And then they were very strong members of the Church of Christ. And my mother converted my father from Southern Baptist to the Churches of Christ. And so I've grown up in the church all my life.
And this was all in Kansas?
So my dad was in the Navy when I was born. So Norfolk, Virginia, I think.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of water in Kansas.
No, there's not. So I'm a military brat, Navy brat, and then my parents moved back to Pueblo, and that's kind of where Dad settled after the Navy. And my grandparents are out in Baca County in southeastern Colorado.
So you would consider home Pueblo?
Garden City.
Garden City.
Most of my life, since the age of 7, we lived around there, moved away to St. John, Kansas in high school, and then back to Garden City, and then off to college and the rest of my career. So,
okay. What'd you do for fun?
Everything from paintball and hunting, hiking, fishing, all those sorts of fun outdoor activities.
Yep, so outdoor all the time?
As much as I could, especially as a kid. Less now.
What's your fondest memory growing up?
Probably just hanging out on the farm. We had 2 family farms on both sides of the family, and spent a lot of summers out on the farm, gardening and doing different things, hanging out and getting into trouble.
So they call it gardening on the farm, not farming?
Well, there was the garden, and then there was the farm. I learned how to drive tractors. So.
Yeah. What was the crop?
So Grandpa grew a number of things, mostly wheat. He did some grass seed, a little bit of alfalfa and some broom corn, and I think he even tried corn a couple different years.
Yeah, very cool. So what convicted you to put Christ on in baptism?
So having my family kind of, one side of the family be Southern Baptist and one being Church of Christ, the question kind of came up one holiday, and my grandfather especially really doesn't like that kind of debate at family gatherings. So I went home after that and kind of asked that question, and I went through and found all the passages I could on baptism and believe and confess and any passage or any key word I could think of. And I went home and I wrote a 15-page paper on why you should be baptized. And
just regular kid stuff.
Yeah, just regular kid stuff, especially for a dyslexic who never wrote research papers and never, read, always listened to audiobooks. For me to sit down and systematically go through my concordance and write down every passage I could and study everything out and then sit down and write out a paper at no one's behest was really a defining moment for me. I mean, the spelling was horrendous, but, the exercise was excellent.
Yeah, coming from someone who also is dyslexic, that is saying a lot that you put yourself into a self-assigned paper.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a son that does that for fun. We know he's not dyslexic.
Yeah. Power to the geeks.
Yeah, there you go. So that was what convicted you. And then you said you were baptized right before camp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So grew up going to Black Mesa Bible Camp. And the year before I was almost baptized, a lot of my friends had been baptized. I was considering it. I knew all the things, right? I had the intellectual knowledge. It was more the making sure I was doing it for the right reasons.
Your heart condition.
Right.
So from there, did you enter into helping out with, preaching, singing, leading prayers?
So it wasn't, I guess, terribly long after that my family moved to St. John, Kansas. And my dad was working for an elder in the church who owned a small business, and became very close with their family. And that church was very good about making sure that the young men were leading singing and doing talks and prayers and things like that. So that's really where I kind of got my feet wet in those kind of things.
So when did you decide you wanted to be a preacher?
Last half of my senior year of high school. Like most kids, I had dreams of doing all sorts of different things and was kicking around a lot of ideas, considered doing like airborne ranger, and decided I wasn't quite cut out for that. So if you can't go big, you go home. So I went home.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of people in my life who were really encouraging me to go into ministry, and finally made that decision to actually do that. And it's been a very big blessing.
Who would you say was your biggest influence?
So that elder of the church that I work for, Stephen Batten, was very influential in encouraging me in that direction. Many camp counselors were encouraging me in that direction. My grandmother was huge in that, telling me I needed to be in the Lord's army, not man's army. But in the end, those were really the influences to get me to make that decision.
Your early mentors?
Yeah, those were definitely the early mentors.
So why'd you decide to go to Sunset School preaching? Obviously preaching, but why that school?
Yeah, so I was looking at Bear Valley and Sunset, and had visited several times both schools, and was really wrestling with what to do. And a family friend introduced me to Ryan Davis. He was a fellow woodworker and had been to all the programs I'd been considering. And he's like, you got to come out and visit with him and get his perspective. So we went out to his, at the time it was a storage unit, and we made curls, and he taught me how to use a hand plane, and then talked to me about my future. And he said, you'll be about 21, 22 when you graduate from either of the programs, and you could be the best preacher in the world, and no one's going to hire you. You're not going to have any experience. You're going to be too young. You may or may not be married at that point. Go to AIM, get some experience, learn how to love people, learn how to study, and then you can go to school. And along the way, you'll get married, and you'll be able to get a job anywhere you want. And his advice was spot on. I followed that to the letter, and have been very blessed by it.
So how was AIM for you?
AIM was good. Definitely have my share of regrets about different things, but overall, AIM was very good. It was a chance for me to learn how to take good notes. It was a chance for me to learn how to study. It was a chance for me to get some practical experience studying, and then applying what I learned. And when I went back to Sunset, I had a understanding of why I needed the information that I was getting. I knew what it was like to apply that information, to lack the information I needed in situations, so that when I was listening to instructors back in school, I was like, I could have used this, 2 years ago when, I was talking to this person or that person. So it was a huge blessing to have basic understanding, basic study, knowledge, then to come back with all that experience and finish out that studying with.
Kind of like on the job training type of deal.
No,
where,
absolutely.
Yeah, where you're in it, and now you know what I need to know.
That's right.
Yeah.
My ignorance has been exposed.
Yeah, and where did you go again for your Adventures and Missions?
So I went to upstate New York, to Troy, and worked with the church up there for 18 months.
Nice. Yeah. And do you have any great fond memories or any stories from that experience?
Oh, there's all sorts of stories and experiences up there. We lived with my team at the top of a really steep hill, notorious for several fire trucks going over on their side, several people who sadly lost their lives on bikes because they burned up the brakes going down. But I would walk down that hill almost every day and make the mile track down to downtown and just walk around and talk to people and start up conversations. And, it was a really, really good time to just kind of be single and be free to share the Lord in whatever way you could.
Well, you're not single now. How'd
Nope.
you meet your wife?
So we were both in the Adventures and Missions program. Alyssa sat on the front row, opposite side of me, and she had this huge interlinear Bible that I thought was as big as she was, and I was the geeky guy with all the pens on the other side of the table. So we became friends in AIM and stayed in touch throughout our time in the Adventures and Missions program, and then we reconnected when we both went back to Sunset to finish out our education.
So you went to Africa. When was that?
Yeah, so soon after we got married, one of our teammates was from Lesotho, and he had invited us up for a mission trip to there. So we decided to take a month, and we spent the first week in Lesotho, and we shared the gospel there and did a series of meetings and door-knocking campaigns, and that was a really good experience. And then we spent the rest of the month kind of going around the rest of South Africa and just kind of getting a feel for the people of that land and seeing the AIM team that was there in Port Elizabeth and getting to know everybody. So it was really good.
How receptive were they to the gospel?
Very receptive, especially there in the poorer neighborhoods in Lesotho. It was a great experience to share the gospel. I forget how many baptisms we had that week, but it was really good working with that young church and seeing the kingdom spread there.
From there, where did you go? Because you finished your school, you did some either Africa. Now, where's your first pulpit ministry?
Yeah, so the first job that I took was in Hempstead, Texas. I had gone ahead and done my training as a youth minister with the plans to do both tracks at Sunset. So I took a job as the family and youth minister there in Hempstead, Texas. Alyssa's grandfather had preached for that church for many years and worked alongside him there, and that was a great experience.
Where is that at in Texas?
So it's just outside of Houston and just south of Bryan College Station.
And how was that ministry?
That was a challenging ministry for me. I was never really the cool kid on the block. That was really not me. So being in youth ministry was kind of out of my element overall. I really wanted to get into the depths of studying and being a geek like I am. And, it was a challenge sometimes to get down there on the kids' level and make sure the lessons were appropriate. The church at the time did not have elders, and that was definitely a challenge to work for a church that didn't have an eldership, and it was definitely a challenge.
So from Texas, where'd you go?
So once I left there, I was the youth minister there for 3 years, and then we moved up here and accepted the work here with the Loveland congregation.
Yep, you've been here for 5 years?
For 5 years in September.
So looking back on your ministry, you obviously said that you had the struggles with youth group. Would you say your toughest struggle in your walk?
Yeah, it's definitely been a challenge in youth ministry with just, there's a lot of challenges that go with youth ministry. Being in a church without an eldership was very draining, not just because, somebody has to do the work of being the shepherd right at a place, so that job normally falls upon the ministers that are at a particular place, but it's also the lack of a guardrail to kind of help insulate the minister. So it was very draining to work for a church where basically I was the pastor or one of the pastors. And actually, when I came here, I figured I couldn't handle the work simply because I couldn't be a pastor for that many people, right? But because I've had good elders here the whole time that I've been here, it's been a blessing to work under elders who want to shepherd and who want to take care of their sheep and who want to look after their membership.
Yeah, because that's the goal of the elder, right, is to look after, and then the goal of the preacher is to teach.
That's right, yeah. To come alongside and to equip and to prepare for the work of ministry.
Yeah, it's a serious responsibility, eldership, for sure. And what you're talking about is the lack of those in that type of ministry can be, like you're saying, really draining, really a struggle to kind of go down that path. And it goes to show the perfect design that God had in mind for His church and how it is to function and not be a drain on its members, but to be a blessing. And when you're missing those pieces, you can tell where God's plan is just, we gotta implement it the way that He wants it, and then it'll become this blessing, as opposed to, like you're talking about, this drain that it can have on you, for sure.
Yeah, and I like the way you put it as not having insulation from the congregation. Basically, everyone having access to you at all times, and you just, like you said, drained.
Yeah. Well, and what I experienced there was that the church is not designed for power, right? As a minister, I'm not here because I'm on a power trip, because I want my will enforced upon, 100, 200 people. That's not the way the church is designed. The church is designed to be servant-led. Whether it be the elders or the deacons or the minister, it's all about service to the people. Sometimes that means making hard decisions. That means making decisions. But it's about service leadership. And what it became within a men's business meeting model was about power. Who had power. People would show up just for the men's meeting who were never there at any other time. And, it was challenging to have everyone have the same voice. I like to say that the church is not a democracy. It's a benevolent dictator, and the dictators are not the shepherds. It's Christ.
Yeah.
Christ is that benevolent dictator. He's the head. He's the one we follow, and the rest of us are simply servants trying to bring things about.
Yeah, I've always called it a monarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a king, and we serve the king.
Yeah. Exactly.
And we serve each other while serving the
That's
king,
right.
because that's what He told us to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, when you look back at your ministry, what's that one moment that just brings, warmth to your heart, joy, keeps you going?
I think it's those moments when I'm able to be around people and I get to see that growth in folks. When I see people begin to take on those leadership roles and learn how to speak publicly or how to mentor others, or you begin to see that growth in people's life, and it's really hard to kind of put your finger on that sometimes, but it in the moment. And I think when you get to see that growth in people is kind of what gives you the strength for the next week.
Yeah, I mean, you teach the gospel, you preach it, you're always talking about it, and this is how it is, this is how God's kingdom is supposed to work, all these things that we always talk about, and then when you actually see it come to fruition, it's like, yes, there it is. And then you're hoping that everyone else can see what you're seeing, and then it just becomes this growth and blessing upon all of us, and we get to see God's kingdom working the way it's designed to work, and it's a beautiful moment. Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Yeah. So often as a preacher, you're talking into the void,
Yeah.
right? You know there's 100 people, 200 people out there listening, who knows how many online, present or future. But when you actually see fruit from all that labor, that's, when you get a little pick-me-up and you're like, all right, I can go on.
Yep. Even if it was just that one person that needed to hear that.
Yeah.
That's it. That one person needed it.
Mm-hmm.
How would you say the ministry is going here in Loveland?
Very good. The pandemic has been a challenge, I think, on every church and everybody across the nation. But our church was willing and able to pivot, and we were able to continue to serve, even if it wasn't the ways we had planned when we headed into 2020. And the church has continued to seek to serve and to seek to adjust as needed.
Yeah, and you were talking about kind of what you're planning on preaching this Sunday, and this idea of it's okay to come back.
Yeah.
It's okay to come back. And, and I don't know if you want to talk about more on that note there of we're always here, we're always welcoming, we're always ready, and it's okay to come back.
Yeah, no, definitely. And since the pandemic has started, I've heard so many different lectureships and, preview books and books on the post-pandemic church. And it's like, guys, we're 2 weeks into this, and we really have kind of followed that 1918 pandemic model of, like 2.5, 3 years. And it's like, oh, it's so exhausting, but people are at different places. And I think that's been the challenge of the pandemic. Some people were done with it before it even began, and some people are still in the midst of it. My wife has some genetic conditions that mean that we have to really take a step back from the way that we would normally act. And, it's hard to, encourage the brotherhood and the congregation, hey, go and enjoy the potluck, but I have to go home. Especially as a minister, that's really hard. But, it's important for us to respect each other as we navigate these times. And I think it's important to look at those who are still joining people online, who are still worshiping online, and to say, you know what? We love you. We care for you. We want you back, but we're also going to trust you. We're going to trust that when you're ready to come back, when you're ready to be in a crowd, when you're ready to be unmasked and people are singing around you, we want you back. And we need to communicate that love. And I think it's a challenge because so often we don't realize what we're communicating. When somebody comes back and we haven't seen them in a long time, it's like, oh, stranger, it's great to see you. And it almost feels like an insult, I think, to the person who hasn't been there in a long time and has longed to be there. And they're like, I don't want to be a stranger. I haven't tried to be a stranger. I don't like this distance. And to really encourage the brotherhood and the congregation that, we need to be welcoming back. When we look at the story of the prodigal's father, and I think it really is about the father. I think that's the purpose of that parable, the seeking of valuable things that are lost and bringing them back. The father welcomes the son back, no questions asked. He doesn't let him have time to give his prepared speech. He just clothes him, loves him, welcomes him back, and celebrates. And I think that's what we should do every Sunday as we have more and more people as we come out of this pandemic, come back in person. And instead of it being isn't it great you're back? That doesn't facilitate people who have been gone for 2 years to come back into to the body of Christ.
And on that same note, it goes to the same vein with not just with the pandemic, but with those that may have fallen away and they're coming back. And we need to be those type of people that are ready and willing, open arms, like you said, the father and the prodigal son. I'm so relieved to see you.
Yeah.
It is such a blessing that you're here. It's not like you're talking where have you been? But you're here. Yes. And it's let's have a party.
Exactly.
Let's be happy together because we're together. And that's, did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's dropping the sarcasm on it's good you're back,
Yeah.
and saying, it's good you're back.
That's right.
You're saying the same thing. You're just coming from a place of love,
Right.
which is what we should always do, right? We should never be
definitely.
so sarcastic, because when we're in that sarcasm mode, then are we really serving others, or are we thinking about ourselves?
And I think we can do a lot of damage to the body of Christ if we come at it from the other perspective. I mean, if we play the mind game and we say, okay, let's say that those who haven't come back, the 10% who are still joining us online, or who maybe aren't even joining us online, they've fallen away. If our approach to them is, how dare you fall away from the Lord? You need to be faithful. If that's our approach, we're going to lose most of those people forever. But if, on the other hand, our approach is, we trust you, we want you back, and we come at it from a position of trust and humility, I think we'll gain more people, even if I'm completely wrong and most people are, just falling into a comfortable level of church in your PJs. I don't think that's where most people are at, but even if my assumption is wrong, I think the approach of assuming that I am right will bring more people back.
Yeah, it's having that love. It's
Yeah.
being a family, waiting for your family member to come back,
Yeah,
and not being like the business type where we need our numbers. Where's our numbers?
that's right.
We need to make sure we hit this. We need to hit that.
Mm-hmm.
We need to look at it as a family. Like, we need to be patient, right? And we need to be loving and understanding.
Yeah,
Yep.
definitely. And I think the millennial generation especially, we really pick up quickly on that business model mindset, and it drives us nuts. And if we're going to gain back, especially the millennial generation, we really have to lose that business model mindset and really come at everything from a place of love and a place of genuineness.
Yeah. And we talked about that on the phone before we set this up, that as millennials, if I even have a sense that someone is being ungenuine,
Yeah.
I turn them off.
Yeah.
I don't care what they have to say, because they're not going to give me the truth. So if we can't be genuine with each other and truly genuine, we know when that's not happening.
And, on that same note, as, Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians, our use of our liberties. And when we're talking about the pandemic and all these different things where you may believe that everything that you believe is completely correct and right. But if you use that as like a cudgel against somebody else, what are you doing? You're just driving a wedge between your family.
Yeah.
We need to use our liberty in a way to glorify God. And if that means that I have to sacrifice my own personal liberties for the sake of others, so be it. I'm here to serve you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of this whole thing that we're going to have to relearn as we come out of this pandemic is, how do we use our spiritual liberties in service to God and in service to others, and not just, well, this is what I can do, and I'm going to do it. Because there was a problem with the Corinthian church. They were driving that wedge with their liberties with the food sacrifice to idols. They were flaunting it almost, it seems, as you read through that passage, and it was hurting some of those members that were really struggling with that. And it's like, well, they weren't being sensitive to their reality that they're living in, and it's, we need to be hypersensitive and aware of that. That is, it's a real thing, especially with this pandemic, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Every time you bring up Corinthians, I just think of heart conditions.
Yeah.
Where were their hearts?
Yeah, their hearts.
I mean, in every subject they were being corrected on was, where's their heart at?
Yep. And I thank God that we have the 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, that church had so many problems, and you go back through and read and go, man, how did this ever work? But it was there for our learning and our education. And, I encourage you, if you're listening, read the book of 1 Corinthians and look at it as a church going through some real struggles, some real hardships, and then how Paul corrects that and guides them, and ultimately ends the book with, I love you. That's why I'm doing this.
Yeah. Well, and when you look at the book of the 1 Corinthians and even 2 Corinthians, we see a church that if any of us, I think, today walked into, we'd be like, oh, they've fallen away. They're not a church. They're a, den of Satan type thing. He calls them Christians. He calls them beloved. maybe we should have a little more grace. I mean, I'm not saying we should, just do whatever, right? It's not liberty, right? Paul talks about that in Romans chapter 6. Shall we go on sinning? No. We died to that.
Yeah.
That's not who we are. But there's a lot of grace, and we should extend a lot more grace, I think, than we do.
Because no matter how much I think I am correct, I guarantee you there's things I'm getting wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't want to put that grace in a box because I need all of it. There's not a certain amount that you're accepted to get, right?
Yeah.
So, and we need to give that as much as we accept to receive it.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and as much as we want to get our doctrine right, it is that thing of grace, right? We're saved by grace, not by knowledge. So if I get something wrong, so long as I'm seeking as best as I can, I believe I'm right in within God's sight, right? First John is a wonderful book, and I love how he describes, this concept of walking in the light as he is in the light. And so long as we're striving for him, and it's really about a posture and a focus, right? I'm focused on him, I'm seeking him, I'm trying my best, then the blood of Jesus continually cleanses me. Maybe I do fall down in the ditch. Maybe I'm heading in the wrong direction. But so long as I'm seeking him, then I think that grace of Christ covers me. That's not a license to sin, but it is a freedom to seek him with everything that we are, and to not feel like we have to get every tit and dottle correct.
Yeah. And like you said, your doctrine could be right. Well, if you don't present that correctly, then what good is it?
Yeah.
Because I know that personally growing up, seeing different examples from, older generations that were spot on what they were saying, but the way it came across just pushed people away.
Yeah, that tone is so important. And when we come at it from a high and mighty perspective, instead of a humility thing, saying, this is how I see things, this is how I understand them, and here's why, right? We can't forget the why. We have to have truth. But it's also about that spirit. It's about that kindness of addressing these things. And I think that's where the church at large, not just within the churches of Christ, but within all of Christendom, is often getting it wrong, is we don't strike that tone right. We're not coming at these things right. We have truth, right? We have that moral high ground, but we're not living it out, and we're also not presenting it in a way that it's understandable to people.
Yeah, and some of the best ways that's presented that I've found in my past is, this is the truth, and this is where I messed it up. This is where I had a problem with this, and this is where I failed, and this is how I got back up, and all these things of how I got through this, and like teaching based off of that experience of failing, whereas as opposed to coming at it from a perspective of, I'm always right, how dare you get this wrong? No, I've messed it up so many times, and this is how I got through it, and you can do it too, because if I can do it, you can do it. And if the Corinthian church can do it, you can do it. And so that type of mentality of going through it is, it's not a perfection game. That we have the grace of God for a reason, and we're going through that. And I've always heard it described this way, as you're talking about 1 John, walking in the light. You're in the hallway, walking in the light. What happens when you trip and fall? You're still in the hallway.
Yeah.
You're still in the light. You have to make that conscious decision to open the door and get out of the hallway, go into the darkness. That's frowned upon. I would not recommend that. But when you're walking that light, you could trip and fall and get back up and go down this and help others along and get people to follow and all these different things. But stay in the light. Stay in the hallway.
Yeah.
Don't go to the side.
Yeah. And what you said just reminded me of something that I hope my scars, my mistakes, my shortcomings can be lighthouses to others to avoid those things. But they can't be if I always hide them, right? I have to show like, hey, I made this mistake.
Yeah.
Don't do this. I tell that to my boys all the time. Like, I'm getting on you because I did this. My 10 and 9-year-old, like, hey, guess what? Your dad got whipped a lot by Papa because of this. Don't do this. And they still do it.
Yeah, because they got to learn the hard way.
Sometimes, yeah. But yeah, just hoping that our scars can be the lighthouse for others. But they have to see it through our, like you said, through our love, through how we present ourselves.
Yeah, well, and that's discipleship, and that's what the church is called to be, right? It's living life alongside one another, and that's the purpose of the body of Christ. That's why we come together as often as we do, and quite frankly, it's not enough, right? Sunday, even if you meet twice and then on a Wednesday, that's not enough to be around each other. And when we fall down in that proverbial hallway, we need one another to help us up. That's why the body of Christ is an in-person gathering, but we also have to acknowledge, right, as we're coming through this pandemic, we've all experienced these times where, we had to be away from one another. We haven't been able to be as in close of contact as possible, and we all long for that day, right? We need that help up, and we need that love, right? That's how we're going to bring people back into that close fellowship, is through that love, coming alongside, seeking out that lost sheep, and putting hands on them and saying, hey, we love you, we miss you, come on back. We look forward to that day when we're able to all be together in close proximity again.
Yeah, and heaven is described in that way, of the great congregation. We're always going to be together. Like that is, church is the closest thing to heaven on earth. If you think about it in that way, where we're praising God, we're together, we have all things in common, all these things, even if we have completely different experiences and hobbies and whatever, we could be completely different people, but we have that gospel in common, and so we are this congregation of a family together. And being together, like I said, is the closest thing we can have to heaven on earth.
Yeah.
So we always come to the end of our podcast here, and we always like to ask our guests kind of our theme, and our goal of this podcast is to kind of get some advice and get some guidance from our guests. Paul wrote to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:2, you need to find faithful men who are able to teach others also. And it's his mentorship and guidance of Timothy there to seek out those that are able to teach others. What advice would you give us and our listeners? How do we do that? How do we continue this? How do we keep encouraging one another and to continue this thing we call church? How do we do that and do the kingdom work and not get burnt out and not get discouraged and not get frustrated, but to be focused on what is really real? What advice would you give us on that?
I think remembering that the body of Christ is about discipleship, right? And if we define discipleship as living life alongside, it really is about seeking out those people to live life alongside. We all need those people who are living life alongside us. For those who are, just sitting in the pews on any given Sunday, don't be afraid to seek out a minister and say, you know what, I'd like to be discipled. I'd like to spend more time with you. I think a lot of us ministers are kind of scratching our heads saying, who can I, mentor, who's open to that. And when you have somebody who actually reaches out, that's a big blessing. Don't be afraid to, take somebody under your wing. You might only be a Christian for a couple of years, but you still have something to share, and maybe you even have something to learn. So seeking out those mentorships, I think, is really good. I hear a lot of people often, complaining, of this thing or that thing isn't happening. Go and do it, right? Like when it comes to something like a young adults class or, going and serving and starting a ministry opportunity, I'm like, who's stopping you? Like, I guarantee you, if you show up at the elders meeting or the preacher's office and you're like, hey, I got this idea, I want to serve in this way, I have these skills, I just need, a blessing to say, go and be fruitful. I think 99% of the time you're going to get a go and be fruitful. And I think it's on the leadership to be ready and able to support those who are willing to come alongside and say, hey, I want this type of a ministry to be going on, and for us to say, let's support you in every way we can to actually do that.
Yeah, and that's kind of how this podcast started. Kevin came to me and said, I got to do this, and, let's do it. And no one else is going to do it. You do it. And so that's great advice. And just, if you see a void, fill the void.
Yeah.
Do it.
And something that came to my mind and it is great advice, but you can't be afraid to be the ones that ask for that help. Like you said, the person that goes and asks. Because we're a bunch of people that want to serve and help each other. But if there's nothing to do, then there's nothing to do. But there is things to do. We just got to be willing and open with each other to say, hey, I could use some help with this. I could use you to help me with this, and give each other the opportunities to serve each other, because that's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah. You know, we all have 24 hours in a day when we all need some time to rest. I've always been one who has been cursed with more ideas than I have time. You know, and I've always kind of scratched my head at those who are like, well, I don't know what to do. Like, well, come over to my house and I'll put you to work. Like, I don't have a lack of things to do. I have a lack of ability to get them done, you know. So I think there's a plethora of ways that we can serve, that we can apply our gifts and our talents, that we can come alongside one another and work together. I think we need to have the vision and the courage to actually go forth and do, you know, whether it be a podcast, whether it be some other ministry. You know, there's 1,000 ways to serve the Lord. Go and be fruitful.
Whatever you choose to do, you will gain way more out of it than anyone else will.
Yeah.
If you do it, if you teach a class, if you prepare a lesson, whatever you're doing, you're going to gain more than anyone who is going to listen to that.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Do you have any closing thoughts for us?
I think I've exhausted all my wisdom.
Well, we really appreciate you taking time out of your day. You say that's the one thing you lack is more time. But we appreciate you taking that time today and sitting down and having a conversation with us. It's been an encouragement. We appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been good to get to know you guys.
Yep, thank you. Yeah.